The drill bit screamed as it chewed through ancient rock, sending vibrations up through the mining platform and into the bones of every worker on site. Krelix watched the readouts with 4 of his compound eyes, while the other 2 monitored the structural integrity displays. 3 kilometers down and the rock was getting strange. Too dense, too regular. "Director, you need to see this." The voice crackled through his helmet radio. It belonged to one of the Luminar engineers, a crystalline being named Gir who rarely showed excitement about anything. Krelix clicked his mandibles in irritation. The Vrel didn't like surprises, especially not on a routine mining operation on a dead moon like Keth 7. "What is it?" "The subsurface scan just came back. There's something down there. Something big." The director scuttled across the platform on his 6 legs, his exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh work lights. The moon had no atmosphere, just endless gray dust and rocks that hadn't moved in millions of years, until now. The holographic display showed what the deep scanners had found. Krelix felt his breathing spiracles close involuntarily. The object was massive, roughly 8 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide. It was buried in solid rock, perfectly preserved, and according to the density readings, it was made of metal. Processed, refined, engineered metal. "That's impossible," Krelix whispered. "Nothing that size could be down there. We surveyed this site for 6 months." Gir's crystalline face flickered with inner light, the Luminar equivalent of a frown. "The alloy composition doesn't match anything in the Galactic Union database." "Director, I think this is old. Really old." "How old?" "At least 600 years. Maybe more." The number hung in the air like a curse. 600 years ago, the galaxy had been a very different place. 600 years ago, humans had still existed as a real civilization, instead of scattered refugees and myths. Krelix made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. "Keep drilling, carefully, I want to know what this is." 20 meters above the discovery site, Dr. Sarai Ohm reviewed the same data on her personal tablet. Her hands trembled slightly as she zoomed in on the scan results. She was human, one of maybe 40,000 left in the entire galaxy, and she had spent her entire adult life studying the ruins her ancestors had left behind. This was different. This was intact. "Krelix, stop the drilling," she said into her radio. "Please. If this is what I think it is, we need to contact the Galactic Council before we go any further." The Vrel's response was sharp. "Dr. Ohm, this is a mining operation, not an archaeological dig. We have quotas to meet. And if you damage a 600-year-old artifact, you'll be explaining to the Council why you destroyed irreplaceable history." Sarai shot back. "I'm coming down." She grabbed her excavation kit and headed for the lift, her heart pounding. The other workers gave her strange looks as she passed. They always did. Humans were rare enough to be exotic, common enough to be dismissed. Too few to matter, too visible to ignore. The lift descended through 3 kilometers of shaft, past layers of rock that told the story of this moon's violent formation. Sarai barely noticed. Her mind was racing through possibilities. A ship, a station, a weapons platform. Humans had built all of those and more during their golden age, before the silence had swallowed Earth and her colonies whole. When she reached the drilling platform, Gir was waiting. The Luminar was tall and angular, his body composed of interlocking crystal structures that refracted light into rainbow patterns. He had never trusted Sarai, though he was professional enough not to say it out loud. "We're 20 meters from the surface," Gir said coldly. "The outer hull is extremely dense. We'll need the heavy laser to breach it." "No lasers," Sarai said firmly. "Not until we know what we're dealing with. Let me examine it first." Krelix scuttled over, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "Dr. Ohm, with respect, we don't have time for this. The company wants results. The company can wait." Sarai moved to the drill control panel and shut down the primary systems. "I'm invoking Article 7 of the Galactic Heritage Protection Act. As the ranking archaeologist on site, I have authority over any pre-Union artifacts." The Vrel's eyes all narrowed at once, a particularly unsettling expression. "You're claiming this as human heritage?" "I'm claiming this as protected until we know what it is." For a long moment, the 3 of them stood in tense silence. Then Krelix's shoulders sagged. "Fine, you have 24 hours. After that, we resume operations with or without your approval." Sarai nodded and moved to the edge of the drill shaft. She could see it now, a dark metallic surface exposed by the drilling. She activated her handheld scanner and pointed it at the hull. The results made her gasp. The alloy was a titanium-carbon composite reinforced with trace elements that shouldn't exist together. It was the kind of material that required zero-gravity foundries and temperatures hot enough to melt lesser metals. It was human engineering at its absolute peak. She reached out and touched the surface. It was cold. So cold her glove sensors immediately warned her about thermal damage. But there was something else, something her instruments couldn't measure. A feeling. A presence. "We need to map the entire structure," she said quietly. "Send down the deep scan drones. I want to know every centimeter of what's down here." It took 6 hours. 6 hours of tense waiting while the drones crawled over the buried object, building a three-dimensional model piece by piece. When the final image assembled on the holographic display, everyone on the platform went silent. It was a ship. A human ship, bigger than anything the Galactic Union had built in the last century. The design was aggressive and purposeful, with weapon ports dotting the hull like the scales of some ancient predator. At the bow, barely visible under centuries of accumulated rock, were letters in standard Earth script. "ESC Indomitable Will United Earth Space Command," Sarai whispered. "This is a supercarrier, a warship from the expansion era." Gier's crystalline structure flashed bright red. "A warship here? Why would humans bury a warship 3 kilometers underground on a worthless moon?" "Maybe they were hiding it," Krellick suggested. Hiding it from what? No one had an answer. Sarai was about to order a more detailed scan when Krellick made his second terrible decision. "We need a sample of the hull material for analysis. One small piece won't hurt anything. Activate the precision laser." "Wait," Sarai started, but it was too late. The laser fired, a focused beam of coherent light designed to slice through solid rock. It hit the hull of the Indomitable Will and burned through the outer armor in 3 seconds. Then everything went wrong. The ship woke up. Light erupted from the breach point. Not the red glow of superheated metal, but brilliant blue-white energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. An electromagnetic wave exploded outward, knocking out every piece of electronic equipment on the platform. Sarai's tablet went dead. The work lights failed. Even the environmental systems in her suit flickered and died before emergency backups kicked in. In the sudden darkness, she heard screaming, felt the platform shake, watched as massive sections of rock around the ship began to crack and fall away, as if the vessel itself was shedding the stone that had imprisoned it. Then the broadcasts started. They came from everywhere and nowhere, transmitted on every frequency simultaneously. Ancient radio waves and modern quantum channels alike carried the same message in a language that predated the Galactic Union by centuries. "Warning, unauthorized breach detected. Defensive protocols active. UESC Indomitable Will to all vessels. Maintain safe distance. This is a restricted military zone. Lethal force is authorized." The message repeated in a dozen languages, some of which Sarai recognized from ancient Earth records. English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic. Languages that hadn't been spoken by living populations in 400 years. Krellick was shouting orders, trying to get systems back online. Gier had drawn his sidearm as if a pistol could do anything against a ship that size. The other workers were fleeing toward the lift, scrambling over each other in their panic. Sarai stood frozen, staring at the hull as more rock fell away. She could see more of the ship now, its surface covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays that were beginning to glow with power. After 6 centuries of silence, the Indomitable Will was coming back to life. And then she saw them. Viewports running along the ship's flank. Behind them, faint lights were flickering on. She enhanced the image on her suit's optical system and saw something that made her blood run cold. Frost. Ice crystals, melting away from transparent surfaces. And behind the frost, barely visible, were shapes. Human shapes. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all perfectly preserved in some kind of suspended animation. "They're still alive," she breathed. "Oh God, they're still alive." The ship's AI responded to her words. Its voice was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its indifference. "Life signs detected aboard. Initiating revival protocols. Estimated time to full crew consciousness, 72 hours. Distress signal active. United Earth Space Command fleets. Respond. This is Indomitable Will. We are under attack. Requesting immediate reinforcement." The message broadcast across every communications channel in the sector. A call for help to an empire that no longer existed, to fleets that had turned to dust centuries ago. But someone heard it. Sarai's suit radio crackled to life as her systems rebooted. She heard Krelix's voice shaking with fear. Dr. Ohm, we need to evacuate now. That ship is powering weapon systems. If it thinks we're hostile, we need to make contact, Sarai interrupted. We need to tell them what happened. That Earth is gone. That humanity is scattered. We need to... Her words died as new contacts appeared on the emergency scanner. Ships. Lots of ships, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. She recognized some of the signatures from her studies. Kryn hegemony warships, Confluence Hive vessels, Void Priest cathedral ships, species that had fought against humanity during the expansion wars, species that remembered what humans could do when they were angry, species that had celebrated when the silence came and the humans disappeared, species that would do anything to make sure humanity stayed dead. The galaxy was about to remember why it had feared Earth, and the indomitable will, buried for centuries in the cold dark, was about to remind them all of a very simple truth. Humans didn't build supercarriers to run away. They built them to win. The Galactic Union Council chamber orbited a neutron star, a symbolic choice meant to remind all species that they existed in a dangerous universe. Today, the danger wasn't theoretical. Counselor Veshtorum, a methane-breathing Quellan who had served for 40 years, watched the holographic projection with growing dread. The image showed the indomitable will in all its terrible glory. Now fully excavated from the rock of Keth 7, the supercarrier hung in space like a sleeping predator, its hull scarred but intact, its weapons cold but ready. The question before us is simple, Veshtorum said, his translator rendering his chemical signals into standard speech. What do we do with it? Destroy it, Zir said immediately. The Luminar stood at the security podium, his crystalline body flashing angry red. That ship represents everything dangerous about old humanity. They built it to conquer, to dominate. We should reduce it to atoms before whatever's inside wakes up completely. Counselor Tavera, a four-armed Sikathi with deep black eyes, raised one hand in objection. That ship is a priceless archaeological treasure. Think of what we could learn about pre-silence humanity. Their technology, their culture, their capacity for violence, Zir interrupted. We know enough about that already. Read the histories. Humans didn't explore the galaxy, they conquered it. 37 species submitted to Earth rule during the expansion. 12 more were exterminated when they resisted. Ancient history, Tavera countered. Humanity has been gone for 4 centuries. The few humans left today are peaceful. They're scientists, traders, artists, not warriors. In the gallery above, Sarai Ohm listened to them debate her species' fate like she wasn't even there. She wanted to scream at them to defend the humans of old Earth, but what could she say? Zir wasn't wrong. Her ancestors had been terrifying. They'd reached the stars and immediately started claiming them, planting flags and building fleets and daring anyone to stop them. And for a while, no one could. Her tablet chimed softly. A message from the research team on Keth 7. Her hands shook as she opened it. First cryopod opened. Subject alive and responsive. Requesting your immediate return. Sarai was moving before she consciously decided to leave. She had to see this. Had to know. The council's argument faded behind her as she ran for the shuttle bay. The medical bay on Keth 7 had been hastily converted from a storage facility. It smelled like antiseptic and fear. Sarai pushed through the crowd of doctors and scientists, all of them chattering in a dozen different languages about the impossibility of what they'd just witnessed. The woman on the medical bed was human, obviously completely undeniably human. She had dark hair going gray at the temples, sharp features and eyes that held the kind of authority that made people instinctively stand straighter. She wore a uniform that Sarai had only seen in historical archives, black and gray with gold insignia on the collar. 4 stars. An admiral. The woman's eyes focused on Sarai with laser intensity. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse from disuse but absolutely steady. You're human. Yes, Sarai managed. My name is Dr. Sarai Ohm. I'm an archaeologist with the Galactic Union. You've been in cryogenic stasis for 623 years. We found your ship buried. I know how long it's been. The Admiral sat up slowly, ignoring the protests of the medical staff. The cryopod systems maintain temporal awareness. I've been aware in a limited way for all of it. Dreaming. Waiting. She looked around the room, taking in the alien faces, the foreign technology, the subtle wrongness of everything. Where's Earth? Where's the fleet? Where's Admiral Chen? We were supposed to rendezvous at Proxima if the Meridian line fell. Sarai felt her throat tighten. What's your name? Admiral Helena Kovich, UESC Indomitable Will, Commanding Officer of Battle Group 17. She said it like a prayer, like an anchor to a reality that no longer existed. Now answer my question, Doctor. Where is Earth? We don't know. The words landed like a physical blow. Kovich's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went very cold. Explain, so Sarai did. She told her about the silence, about how 400 years ago every human world had gone dark simultaneously, how ships sent to investigate found planets empty but intact, cities abandoned mid-meal, fusion reactors still running with no one to tend them. How the few humans who survived were those who'd been away from their home systems when it happened, how they'd searched for decades before giving up, how humanity had become a ghost story. Kovich listened without interrupting. When Sarai finished, the Admiral sat in silence for a long moment. Then she stood up, steadier than she had any right to be after 6 centuries in a cryopod. I need to speak with Archimedes. Who? The ship's AI, artificial intelligence. Our command computer. Kovich looked at the nearest technician, a nervous Vrel named Kiptik. Can you establish a communication link to my vessel? Kiptik's mandibles clicked uncertainly. The ship's systems are still powering up. The AI has been broadcasting warnings, but it hasn't responded to our attempts at contact. It will respond to me. Kovich held out her hand. Give me a radio. Any radio. Someone handed her a standard Union communicator. Kovich turned it on and spoke clearly. Archimedes, this is Kovich, authorization code Juliet 7 Tango 95 Whiskey. Respond. The radio crackled. Then a voice emerged, male and measured, with just a hint of warmth that marked it as something more than a simple computer. Authorization confirmed. Admiral Kovich, it is profoundly gratifying to hear your voice again. I was beginning to fear I had made an error in the revival sequence. Status report. Archimedes. Hull integrity at 97%. Power systems at 43% and climbing. Weapon systems online but not armed. Life support optimal. I have successfully initiated revival protocols for Cryobay Alpha. 10,762 souls remain in stasis awaiting your orders. 10,000. Sarai felt dizzy. There were more humans aboard that ship than existed in the entire rest of the galaxy. Kovich's expression remained neutral. How long until we're spaceworthy? At current power restoration rates, 48 hours for basic maneuvering. 72 for full combat capability. Why were we buried? Unknown, Admiral. My last coherent memory before entering low power mode was receiving your orders to execute Protocol Gehenna. Emergency concealment, full system shutdown, maximum stealth configuration. You authorized it personally from the bridge approximately 622 years, 7 months and 14 days ago. Kovich closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked at Sarai. Protocol Gehenna was a doomsday order. We only used it if we were facing total annihilation and needed to preserve the ship at all costs. I don't remember giving that order. Memory degradation is consistent with emergency cryogenic suspension, Archimedes offered helpfully. You may have entered your pod immediately after authorization. The process can cause short-term memory loss. What were we running from? Sarai asked quietly. I don't know. Kovich's hands clenched into fists. But if I ordered Protocol Gehenna, it was something that could destroy a supercarrier. Something that could threaten Earth itself. The room went very quiet. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but it was a Luminar medical officer who finally said it out loud. What if it wasn't an enemy that made Earth go silent? What if it was whatever you were running from? Kovich turned to look at the officer, and there was something in her expression that made even the brave Luminar take a step back. If something destroyed Earth, Kovich said softly, then humanity's last supercarrier has a duty to avenge it. But first I need information. Dr. Ohm, you said you're with the Galactic Union. I need access to your historical archives. Everything you have about the silence. Everything you have about what happened to my people. I can arrange that, Sarai said. But Admiral, you need to understand something. The galaxy has changed. Humanity isn't the dominant power anymore. We're barely noticed. And there are a lot of species out there who remember the expansion wars. Who remember what Earth did to them? Are you saying we're in danger? I'm saying your ship just broadcast a distress signal across half the galaxy. and some of the people who received it aren't coming to help. As if on cue, alarms began wailing throughout the facility. Kiptik scrambled to a wall-mounted display, his 6 legs moving in agitated patterns. Multiple contacts dropping out of FTL at system's edge, he reported, his voice high with panic. Kryn hegemony signatures. Confluence bioships, Void Priest vessels. Admiral, they're not hailing us. They're just coming. Kovach walked to the window that overlooked the landing bay. In the distance, framed against the stars, the indomitable will hung in space. Even damaged, even ancient, it looked deadly. Archimedes, she said calmly. What's our defensive capability at current power levels? Sufficient to destroy approximately 47% of incoming vessels before being overwhelmed. However, I should note that would require firing on Galactic Union territory without authorization. Current regulations classify this as, I don't care about current regulations. How long until those fleets reach firing range? 17 hours, 32 minutes. Kovach turned to face Sarai. Can your Galactic Union protect us? Sarai thought about the Council, still debating whether the indomitable will should exist at all. Thought about the Union Navy, whose most powerful ships were half the size of the supercarrier and equipped with weapons that were centuries out of date by Earth standards. No, she admitted. We can't. Then I guess we protect ourselves. Kovach's expression hardened into something that would have been very familiar to her crew 6 centuries ago. Archimedes, begin emergency crew revival. Military personnel first. I want pilots, gunners, and engineers conscious and at their stations within 6 hours. Admiral, that's extremely dangerous. The recommended revival period is 24 hours per person to avoid. I know the risks. Do it anyway. Sarai stepped forward. Admiral Kovach, if you fight them, you'll start a war. The entire galaxy will turn against humanity. Kovach looked at her with something like pity. Dr. Ohm, the war never ended. We just stopped being there to fight it. Now we're back. She touched the 4 stars on her collar. And they're about to remember why they needed 400 years to work up the courage to attack a human ship. In orbit above, the indomitable will's lights began to burn brighter. Deep within its hull, cryopods started opening one by one, and the souls of old Earth, warriors and killers and patriots who had gone to sleep in one galaxy, opened their eyes in another. The ghosts of Terra were waking up, and they were very, very angry. The bridge of the indomitable will had not changed in 600 years. The command chairs were still the same dark gray, designed for humans who might spend days in combat without rest. The holographic displays still showed tactical information in the crisp, efficient style that Earth's military had perfected. Even the smell was familiar to Admiral Kovach, that mixture of recycled air and metal and determination that she'd breathed on 100 different ships. But the crew was different. They were younger than she remembered because they hadn't aged at all. Fresh-faced lieutenants who should be grandparents by now. Grizzled sergeants who should be dust. They moved through the ship with the easy confidence of people who had gone to sleep yesterday and woken up today. With no idea that yesterday had been 6 centuries ago, Kovach stood at the center of the bridge and watched them work. Tactical stations coming online. Navigation plotting courses. Communications attempting to raise a fleet command that no longer existed. They were doing their jobs because that's what humans did. They found themselves in impossible situations and they did their jobs anyway. Admiral, we have a problem. Commander Luis Reyes, her executive officer, approached with a tablet in his hand. He was a stocky man with kind eyes and the sort of quiet competence that made him perfect for keeping a crew of 12,000 functioning. Archimedes briefed me on the current political situation while I was in medical. Ma'am, we're alone out here. Earth is gone. The fleet is gone. We're the only major human military asset left in the galaxy. I'm aware, Commander. Then you're also aware that fighting these incoming fleets would be suicide. We're one ship. They're bringing hundreds. Kovach pulled up the tactical display. The enemy fleets were spread across the system like a tightening noose. Kryn hegemony warships. Each one a brutal wedge of armor and railguns designed to punch through capital ship hulls. Confluence bioships. Living vessels that could regenerate damage faster than conventional weapons could inflict it. And the Void Priests whose ships bent space-time itself into weapons. Against any one of them, the indomitable will would have good odds. Against all 3, plus whatever other forces were on their way, the math was brutal. You're right, Commander. It would be suicide to fight them. Kovach looked at him steadily, but it would also be suicide to surrender. These species didn't come here to negotiate. They came here to make sure humanity stays dead. Then what do? We remind them why it took 400 years of us being gone before they worked up the courage to try. Kovac turned to the tactical station. Lieutenant Park, what's our weapons status? The young officer checked her displays, fingers dancing over holographic controls. Graviton cannons at 60% charge. Missile tubes loaded, but we're running on 40-year-old torpedoes from storage. Point defense grid is fully online. Drone bays. Ma'am, we have a problem with the drones. What kind of problem? No problem at all, ma'am. They're perfect. All 3,000 of them are ready to deploy. Kovac allowed herself a small smile. The drones had been one of Earth's secret weapons during the expansion. Autonomous fighters that could overwhelm enemy point defenses through sheer numbers. Each one was barely bigger than a civilian car, armed with a single plasma cannon and enough intelligence to choose its own targets. 3,000 of them would look like a swarm of angry wasps to any fleet. Commander Reyes, General Quarters. All hands to battle stations. Launch all drones and have them form a defensive sphere around the ship. I want our graviton cannons tracking the largest enemy vessels. Prepare to fire on my command. Aye, Admiral. The ship came alive around her. Hatches sealed. Atmosphere vented from non-essential compartments. Somewhere deep in the hull, the massive power cores that had been sleeping for 6 centuries began spinning up to combat speed, feeding energy to weapons that could crack planets. On the view screen, Sarai Ohm's face appeared. The archaeologist had been transferred to a Union observation ship at the edge of the system, safely away from what was about to happen. She looked terrified. Admiral Kovac, please, let us try to negotiate. The Union can mediate, we can find a peaceful solution. Dr. Ohm, with all respect, your Union has had 400 years to prepare for this moment. What have you done? You let humanity scatter. You turned our worlds into museums. You let species that hate us build fleets without opposition. Kovac's voice was hard. The time for negotiation ended when they decided to attack without even attempting communication. Now we speak the only language they'll understand. Violence won't solve this. Maybe not. But it will buy time for the 10,000 people on this ship to survive one more day. Kovac nodded to the communications officer, who cut the channel. The first enemy ships entered weapons range 12 hours later. They came in waves, each fleet maintaining its own formation but coordinating their approach. The Kryn hegemony took the lead, their wedge-shaped battlecruisers accelerating to attack speed. Behind them, the Confluence bioships pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, communicating with each other in their strange hive language. The Void Priests held back, their cathedral ships hanging in space like waiting predators. Admiral Kovac watched them come with the patience of someone who had fought 100 battles before breakfast. She waited until they were committed, until they were so close that retreat would mean exposing their vulnerable engine sections. Then she spoke one word. Fire. The indomitable will had been designed as humanity's answer to overwhelming force. Every weapon system had been built with one purpose in mind, to kill ships bigger than itself. The graviton cannons fired first, invisible beams of twisted space-time that made enemy hulls crumple like tissue paper. 3 Kryn battlecruisers simply ceased to exist, compressed into singularities so small they evaporated in microseconds. The missile tubes followed, launching torpedoes that each carried a microfusion warhead. They weren't particularly large by modern standards, but they didn't need to be. They were smart, able to dodge point defense and choose impact points for maximum damage. 12 of them hit a Confluence command ship, and the bioship's regeneration couldn't keep up with that much destruction at once. It died screaming in frequencies that made the human crew wince. But the drones were the real surprise. They launched in a cloud so thick it looked like smoke. 3,000 autonomous fighters moving with inhuman precision. They didn't attack the enemy ships directly. Instead, they positioned themselves in the space between the indomitable will and the enemy fleets, creating a moving wall of point defense that shot down every missile, every torpedo, every boarding pod the enemy could throw. And when enemy fighters tried to break through, the drones hunted them like wolves. Enemy fleet is breaking formation, Lieutenant Park reported, her voice steady despite the chaos on the tactical display. The Kryn are trying to flank us, but our drones are forcing them to maintain distance. Confluence ships are attempting to ram the drone screen. Let them, Kovac said calmly. Drones are cheaper than hull repairs. Commander Reyes, bring us about. New heading 347 Mark II. I want our broadside facing that hegemony formation. The ship turned ponderously, its massive bulk defying physics through the same graviton technology that powered its weapons. As the enemy fleet came into the firing arc of the port weapons batteries, Kovac nodded. Full broadside. Fire. 20 graviton cannons fired simultaneously. The effect was devastating. An entire wing of Kryn destroyers simply disappeared, their matter converted to energy in blinding flashes. The surviving ships scattered, their neat attack formations disintegrating into chaos. But the Void Priests were moving now. Their cathedral ships were strange vessels, all sweeping curves and impossible angles that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could properly process. They didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, reality around them began to bend. Space itself twisted. The drones closest to the Void Priest vessels simply stopped existing, erased from reality by equations that violated every known law of physics. The indomitable will shields flared as patches of spacetime tried to fold in on themselves, tried to turn the ship inside out like a sock. Hull stress increasing, someone reported. Sections 17 through 23 showing structural fatigue. Ma'am, if they keep this up, they'll tear us apart without firing a shot. Kovac's mind raced. The Void Priests were the real threat here. The Kryn and the Confluence were conventional enemies, dangerous but understandable. But the Priest had access to technology that Earth had never fully grasped. Weapons that operated on principles human science had barely theorized. She needed an answer to them. Something they wouldn't expect. Archimedes, she said quietly. Do we still have the prototype jump drive installed? The AI's response was immediate and concerned. Yes, Admiral. However, I must strenuously advise against using it. The drive was never fully tested. The theoretical models suggest a 73% chance of catastrophic failure if activated inside a gravity well. What are the chances of catastrophic failure if we do nothing? 100%, Admiral. Then 73% sounds pretty good to me. Plot a micro jump. I want to appear directly behind that lead Void Priest vessel. Point-blank range. Admiral, that's an order. Archimedes, do it. The jump drive had been one of Earth's final experiments before the silence, an attempt to create a faster-than-light system that didn't require hours of calculation and preparation. It worked by creating a temporary wormhole, a tunnel through space that could be traversed in an instant. The problem was that wormholes tended to be unstable, especially when you created them inside a solar system, where a dozen different gravitational fields were pulling in different directions. When the indomitable will activated the drive, reality screamed. The ship didn't move so much as it stopped existing in one place and started existing in another. For the crew, it felt like being turned inside out and then right side in again. For the enemy fleet, it looked like the human supercarrier had simply vanished. Then it reappeared, directly behind the largest Void Priest cathedral ship, close enough that their shields were overlapping. Kovac didn't wait for the enemy to react. Point-blank broadside. Everything we have. At that range, shields were meaningless. The graviton cannons fired directly into the Void Priest ship's hull, tearing through exotic matter and whatever passed for crew compartments in their vessels. Missiles launched and detonated before they'd traveled 10 meters. The entire port side of the cathedral ship simply ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding cloud of debris and exotic radiation. The wormhole that had brought the indomitable will here was collapsing now, but it was doing so slowly, unstably. And as it collapsed, it was sucking in everything nearby with gravitational forces strong enough to bend light. The dying Void Priest ship was pulled into the wormhole. Then 2 more Priest vessels that had been too close. They disappeared into the collapsing spacetime, and the wormhole sealed behind them with a flash of Cherenkov radiation that lit up the entire battlefield. 3 cathedral ships, gone in an instant. The remaining enemy fleet froze. Kovac could almost see them recalculating, their commanders suddenly realizing that this wasn't going to be the easy victory they'd expected. She opened a channel to all enemy vessels. When she spoke, her voice was cold and absolutely certain. I am Admiral Helena Kovac of the United Earth Space Command. You came here expecting to find a derelict. Instead, you found a warship. You came expecting to finish what was started 4 centuries ago. Instead, you're learning why humanity spent those centuries haunting your nightmares. I'm giving you one chance. Leave now, or the next wormhole opens inside your flagship. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the Kryn fleet began turning away, their ships accelerating toward the edge of the system. The Confluence ships hesitated, then followed. Even the surviving Void Priest vessels, their cathedral ships damaged and their dead being sucked into artificial singularities, began a fighting retreat. They left behind debris and bodies and the wreckage of dozens of ships. But they left. Commander Reyes let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like hours. "Ma'am, we did it. They're running. For now," Kovach said quietly. She looked at the tactical display, at the drone cloud returning to the ship, at the damage report scrolling across her screens. "But they'll be back. And next time they'll bring more ships. Archimedes, what's our status?" "Hull integrity at 71%. Power systems strained but functional. Graviton cannons will need 6 hours to recharge. Drone losses at 42%. Jump drive is... Admiral, the jump drive is completely destroyed. That was a one-time trick." "Understood. Begin recovery operations. Get our drones back and start repairs." Kovach turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to Dr. Ohm." The archaeologist's face appeared on the screen. She looked stunned. "Admiral, what did you do?" "What I had to. Now, Doctor, I need you to take a message to your Galactic Union. Tell them that humanity is back. Tell them that we're not asking for permission to exist. And tell them that if they want peace, they need to talk to us as equals, not as refugees, not as relics, as equals. And if they refuse..." Kovach looked at the stars beyond the view screen, the same stars that had watched humanity rise and fall and rise again. "Then they'll learn the same lesson the Kryn just learned. We're not the monsters they remember. We're worse. We're the monsters that survived." She cut the channel and turned back to her crew. They were looking at her with expressions that mixed fear and pride and desperate hope. They had just fought impossible odds and won, but they all knew it couldn't last. Somewhere in the ship's databanks, buried in terabytes of military records, was a file that might explain everything. A file that might tell them what they had been running from, what they had been hiding from when Protocol Gehenna was ordered. But before Kovach could begin looking for it, Archimedes spoke up. "Admiral, I'm detecting an anomaly, a signal coming from deep space. It's on a very old Earth frequency, one that hasn't been used in... How old? 623 years, Admiral. The signal is a response to our distress call. It's saying they're coming to help. They're coming from Earth." Kovach felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "That's impossible. Earth is gone." "Perhaps not, Admiral. The signal includes authentication codes that only Earth Command would have. Someone's still home, and they've been waiting for us to wake up." For the first time since emerging from cryosleep, Admiral Helena Kovach allowed herself to hope. Humanity wasn't dead after all, and they were about to find out what had really happened during the silence. The ships came through normal space like sharks cutting through dark water, their hulls painted in matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They were human vessels, unmistakably so, with the same aggressive angles and purposeful design that marked Earth's military aesthetic. But they were different too, sleeker, more advanced. Like the indomitable will had been the grandfather, and these were the grandchildren, refined through generations of war. Admiral Kovach stood on her bridge and watched them approach. 37 ships in tight formation, each one broadcasting proper UESC identification codes that were 6 centuries old and yet somehow current. The lead vessel was enormous, easily twice the size of her supercarrier, a dreadnought that looked like it could eat stars for breakfast. "They're hailing us," Lieutenant Park said softly. "Audio and visual. Authentication codes are..." "Ma'am, they're perfect. These are Earth military vessels. Put them through." The view screen flickered and resolved into the image of a man who looked like he'd been fighting a war for far too long. He had Asian features, silver-gray hair cut military short, and eyes that held the kind of exhaustion that came from seeing too much death. He wore a uniform similar to Kovach's but updated, with insignia she didn't recognize and rank markers that seemed both familiar and strange. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Admiral Kovach, I'm Commodore Jin Sato of the Terran Defense Initiative. It's incredibly good to see you. We've been waiting a long time for this." Kovach kept her expression neutral. "Commodore Sato, your ships are broadcasting Earth Command codes, but Earth Command hasn't existed for 400 years. Explain." Sato's smile was sad. "That's not entirely true, Admiral. Earth Command still exists. We've just been fighting a war that the rest of the galaxy couldn't see. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I think it's time you knew the truth about the silence. About what really happened. May I come aboard? This conversation should happen face to face. 2 hours later, Sato sat in the Indomitable Will's conference room with Kovac, Commander Reyes, and Dr. Ohm, who had insisted on being present for this. The Commodore had brought a data chip containing files that Earth had compiled over 4 centuries of secret history. He looked old, under the harsh lights, tired but determined. I should start at the beginning, Sato said. Admiral, do you remember the deep space anomalies that were being reported in the months before you went into stasis? Kovac frowned, searching her memory. Vaguely. Navigation errors. Ships reporting that spacetime felt wrong in certain areas. We thought it was sensor malfunctions. It wasn't. It was the first sign of the recursion. The word hung in the air like a curse. Dr. Ohm leaned forward. What is the recursion? Sato pulled up a holographic display. It showed an image that made no sense to human eyes. Something that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. We're still not entirely sure. The best explanation our scientists have come up with is that it's a predatory entity from another dimension. Or maybe it's a natural phenomenon, like a cosmic storm that eats reality. Either way, 412 years ago, it broke through into our universe. Where? Kovac demanded. Everywhere. That's the problem. The recursion doesn't exist in normal space. It exists in the spaces between, in the quantum foam, in the mathematical foundations of reality itself. It spread across human space in an instant, touching every world, every station, every ship. Reyes spoke up, his voice shaky. What did it do? It consumed them. Not physically, but dimensionally. Every planet that the recursion touched was pulled out of normal spacetime and into somewhere else. A pocket dimension. A prison made of broken physics and impossible geometry. Sato's hands clenched into fists. Earth had maybe 6 hours of warning before it hit. 6 hours to prepare for the end of everything. But Earth didn't end, Sarai said softly. You're here. Your ships are here. Because humanity did the only thing we could. We ran toward the danger instead of away from it. Sato pulled up another image, this one showing a massive ring structure orbiting Earth. We'd been experimenting with dimensional technology for decades, trying to create artificial wormholes, pocket dimensions for storage, faster-than-light systems that bent space instead of traversing it. The research was promising but unstable. We were decades away from making it practical. We didn't have decades, Kovac said quietly, understanding dawning. No, we didn't. So Earth Command made a choice. Every ship, every station, every colony that could reach Earth did so. We evacuated 47 core worlds in 6 hours. 7 billion people crammed into every transport we had. And then we activated the experimental dimensional engines, all of them simultaneously, in orbit around Earth. The hologram showed what happened next. The rings around Earth had blazed with impossible light, tearing a hole in reality itself. And then Earth and its fleet had simply stepped sideways out of the universe. We created our own pocket dimension, Sato explained. A bubble of stable spacetime separated from the rest of reality by a dimensional barrier. The recursion couldn't reach us there, but we couldn't reach out either. We were isolated, completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy. For 400 years, Reyes breathed. For 400 years, we fought the recursion from inside our bubble. It's been trying to break through the entire time, and we've been holding the line. Barely. Sato's expression was grim. We lost Mars in year 70. The barrier failed there, and the recursion got through. We had to collapse that section of the dimension, cutting Mars away like a cancer. 3 billion people died when we did it. The room was silent. Sarai looked like she might be sick. Kovac's face was a mask, but her eyes betrayed her horror. Why didn't you come out? Kovac asked. Why stay isolated? Because the recursion is patient. It's been sitting at the edges of our dimension for 4 centuries, waiting for us to drop the barrier. If we did, it would flood into normal space and consume everything. Not just Earth, the entire galaxy. Sato met her eyes. We sacrificed our connection to the rest of humanity to save them, to give the galaxy a chance to exist without being devoured. That's not sacrifice, Kovac said harshly. That's abandonment. You left us, left humans scattered across the galaxy to be picked off one by one. We had no choice. There's always a choice. Kovac stood up, pacing the small conference room. You could have sent a warning. Could have told the galaxy what was coming. We tried. In the first weeks, we sent probe ships through the barrier with warning messages. None of them made it. The recursion destroys anything that passes through the dimensional walls. We lost 12 ships and 300 volunteers before we accepted that we were truly alone. Sarai spoke up, her voice quiet. Why are you here now? If the barrier is still up, if the recursion is still waiting, how did you get out? Sato's expression went from grim to tragic. Because the barrier is failing. We've held it for 4 centuries, but it's finally breaking down. We have maybe 72 hours before the recursion breaks through Earth's defenses. When that happens, it won't just consume Earth. It'll spread into normal space. Every world in the galaxy will face what we've been fighting all this time. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Kovach sat down heavily. How many people are left on Earth? She asked. 2 billion. We've lost 5 billion over the centuries. War, resource depletion, dimensional radiation sickness. Living in a pocket dimension wasn't meant to be permanent. Our bodies are breaking down. Our technology is failing. We're dying, Admiral. Slowly but surely we're dying. And your solution is what? To drop the barrier and hope for the best? No. Our solution is to use the one weapon we've developed that might actually work against the recursion. A reality anchor. A device that can stabilize spacetime and prevent dimensional breaches. Sato looked directly at Kovach. The prototype is stored in Earth's orbital research station, but we can't deploy it from inside the dimension. It needs to be placed in normal space at the exact point where the recursion will break through. Let me guess, Reyes said. That point is Earth. Yes, when the barrier fails, the recursion will pour through at Earth's coordinates. We need to be there in normal space with the reality anchor active. It's our only chance to seal the breach permanently. Kovach understood now. But you can't bring Earth back through the barrier while the recursion is attacking. You'd lead it straight into the galaxy. Exactly, which is why we need time. We need someone to hold the line while we prepare the anchor, while we evacuate as many people as we can, while we set up the final defense. Sato looked at the Admiral with something like hope. We need the indomitable will. You're asking me to take my ship into a dimensional war zone and fight an enemy that's destroyed entire worlds, with 10,000 crew who just woke up from 600 years of sleep. Yes, that's insane. Yes. Kovach looked at her officers. Reyes looked terrified but resolute. Sarai looked like she was watching history unfold and couldn't decide if it was glorious or horrible. Lieutenant Park was at her station, already running tactical calculations because that's what good officers did when the universe went crazy. What happens if we fail? Kovach asked quietly. The recursion breaks through. Reality starts collapsing across the galaxy. Every species, every world, every living thing gets pulled into dimensional limbo. The universe as we know it ends. Sato's voice was steady. But if we succeed, we seal the breach. We stop the recursion. We save Earth and the galaxy and give humanity a chance to come home. And the reality anchor? How do we deploy it? That's the hard part. Sato pulled up a schematic that showed a device the size of a small moon. The anchor needs to be placed at the exact center of the dimensional breach. It needs to be powered by a massive energy source, and it needs to be defended while it activates, which takes approximately 6 hours. 6 hours of holding off an extra-dimensional horror, Reyes muttered. No problem. There's one more thing, Sato said quietly. The anchor is designed to create a permanent seal. Once it's activated, nothing can pass through the dimensional barrier at Earth's location. Not the recursion. Not ships. Not even signals. Anyone on the wrong side of the barrier when it activates will be trapped there. Forever. Understanding dawned on Kovach's face. You're not planning to evacuate Earth, you're planning to seal it away. Some of us, yes. We're going to make sure the anchor stays active. Make sure the recursion never breaks through. It'll take volunteers, but Earth has always had those. And the people you can evacuate? We have transport ships ready. We can save maybe 500 million before the barrier fails. They'll need a home. They'll need a fleet to protect them while they find one. Sato looked at the indomitable will's commander. They'll need an admiral who remembers what Earth was and what it could be again. Kovach stood and walked to the viewport. Outside, she could see Sato's fleet maintaining position, their weapons cold but ready. Beyond them, the stars shone with indifferent light. Somewhere out there, Earth was dying. Humanity was dying, and the only thing standing between reality and oblivion was a 600-year-old warship and a crew that shouldn't exist. She thought about her orders from 6 centuries ago, about Protocol Gehenna, about how she'd buried her ship to preserve it for a future that needed it. This was that future. Archimedes, she said quietly, plot a course to Earth's last known coordinates, and wake the rest of the crew, all of them. We're going to war. Behind her, Sato closed his eyes in relief. Sarai was crying quietly. Reyes was already moving to execute orders, and somewhere in the dark between dimensions, the recursion felt humanity preparing to fight back. It had been feeding on their reality for 400 years. It had consumed worlds and fleets and civilizations. It was patient and eternal and utterly unstoppable, but it had never fought the indomitable will. That was about to change. The combined fleet assembled at the edge of known space, a gathering of ships that would have been impossible just days before. The indomitable will sat at the center, its ancient hull now bearing scars from the battle with the Kryn and Confluence. Around it hung Sato's Terran defense vessels, their black hulls seeming to drink in starlight. But they weren't alone. The Galactic Union had voted, and for the first time in 400 years, humanity wasn't fighting alone. Vril cruisers held position alongside Luminar battleships. Even a few Kryn vessels had joined, their commanders choosing survival over ancient grudges. Dr. Ohm had explained the recursion to the Council, and they'd understood that this wasn't humanity's war anymore. It was everyone's war. Admiral Kovac stood on her bridge and watched the fleet count climb. 200 ships. 300. By the time they were ready to jump, over 500 vessels had gathered under her command. It was the largest combined fleet in galactic history. It still might not be enough. Admiral, all ships report ready, Commander Reyes said. He looked different now, harder. The past few days had aged him in ways that years couldn't match. Jump coordinates are locked. Earth's dimensional pocket relative position maintained from 400 years ago. What are we going to find there? Lieutenant Park asked quietly. No one had an answer. The probes they'd sent had come back with data that made no sense. Space-time readings that violated every law of physics. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist. And at the center of it all, Earth, still transmitting a weak beacon that said humanity endured. Signal the fleet, Kovac ordered. All ships jump on my mark. Weapons hot on arrival. Expect immediate contact with hostile forces. And remember, we're not here to win. We're here to buy time. She took a deep breath. Mark. The universe twisted. Faster than light travel was supposed to be smooth, a gentle translation from one point in space to another. This was nothing like that. The indomitable will pushed through reality like it was punching through a wall, and when it emerged on the other side, everyone on the bridge immediately understood why the recursion was called what it was called. Space was broken. That was the only way to describe it. Space-time itself was fracturing, reality coming apart at the seams like a cloth that had been stretched too thin. Stars existed in multiple places simultaneously. Planets hung suspended in impossible orbits. And everywhere, threading through the normal matter of the universe like cancer through flesh, were the wounds. The recursion appeared as tears in reality, places where the normal laws of physics simply didn't apply. Some were small, barely visible cracks that leaked impossible light. Others were enormous, gaping holes that led to somewhere else, somewhere that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. And coming through those holes were the entities. They weren't ships. They weren't even creatures in any traditional sense. They were mathematical impossibilities given form, shapes that existed in too many dimensions, things that moved through space by unmaking it and remaking it around themselves. Some looked almost recognizable, like twisted parodies of ships or stations. Others were pure abstraction, geometric nightmares that hurt to look at. Contact. Park's voice was shrill with fear. Multiple contacts, thousands of them, emerging from dimensional breaches throughout the system. Oh God, they're everywhere. Kovac forced herself to look at the tactical display. The recursion entities were flooding into normal space like water through a broken dam. They filled the system, a tide of impossible things that should not exist. And at the center of the system, barely visible behind a failing energy barrier, was Earth. It looked wrong. The planet's rotation was stuttering, moving forward and backward simultaneously. Continents phased in and out of existence. The atmosphere flickered between blue and colors that had no names. But it was there. Earth was still there. All ships engage at will, Kovac ordered. Priority targets are the larger entities. Keep them away from the barrier. Commodore Sato, How long until you can deploy the reality anchor? Sato's voice crackled through the chaos. 6 hours if everything goes perfectly. We need to get the anchor from Earth's orbital station and place it at the dimensional breach point. But we can't do that until we stabilize the barrier. Then stabilize it. We're trying. The fleet opened fire and hell came with them. The indomitable Will's graviton cannons tore through recursion entities, but the things didn't die the way normal matter died. They came apart like puzzles, their constituent pieces scattering before reforming somewhere else. Missiles hit targets that phased out of existence before the warheads could detonate. Energy weapons passed through enemies that chose not to be solid at that particular moment. The Galactic Union ships had it worse. Their technology wasn't designed to fight enemies that existed in multiple dimensions. A Luminar battleship fired its main cannon at a recursion entity and watched as the beam curved back on itself, striking its own ship. A Vrel cruiser tried to ram an enemy and passed straight through it, emerging on the other side with half its crew simply gone, erased from reality. But humanity's ships were different. They'd been fighting this war for 400 years. They knew the tricks. Sato's fleet deployed weapons that Kovac had never seen before, dimensional disruptors that forced recursion entities to exist in only 3 dimensions, making them vulnerable. Reality anchors on a smaller scale, creating pockets of stable spacetime that the entities couldn't enter. And most impressively, they had learned to predict where the recursion would attack next, positioning ships to intercept before the entities fully manifested. It was a dance, terrible and beautiful. Humanity fighting an enemy that shouldn't exist with weapons that bent the rules of reality. The indomitable Will pushed forward, its drones forming a protective sphere that shot down smaller entities before they could reach the hull. Kovac aimed for the largest breaches, the ones leaking the most recursion entities into normal space, and fired everything she had. Target the dimensional tiers themselves, she ordered. If we can't kill these things, we close the doors they're using. It worked, partially. Graviton cannons focused on a single breach could destabilize it, forcing it to collapse. But for every breach they closed, 3 more opened. The recursion was adapting, learning their tactics, finding new ways through. Hours passed in a blur of violence. Ships died. The fleet counter dropped from 500 to 400 to 300. Kovac watched Galactic Union vessels sacrifice themselves to protect human ships, aliens dying to defend a species they'd barely trusted days ago. And all the while, Earth's barrier grew weaker. Admiral, we've got the anchor. Sato's voice cut through the chaos. Transport ships are beginning evacuation. 500 million souls, that's all we can save. But we can save them. Where do you need us? The breach point is at Earth's North Pole. We need you to hold position there while the anchor deploys. 6 hours, Admiral. Can you give us 6 hours? Kovac looked at her tactical display. They had maybe 200 ships left. The recursion entities numbered in the tens of thousands. The math was impossible. We'll give you 6 hours, she said firmly, or we'll die trying. The indomitable Will turned toward Earth, toward the largest dimensional breach in the system. It was massive, a wound in reality kilometers across, and through it poured an endless stream of recursion entities. The fleet followed her. Not all of them. Some were too damaged, too depleted. But enough. 100 ships, battered and bleeding, formed a defensive sphere around the point where the reality anchor would deploy. And then Kovac did something that 600 years of military doctrine said was insane. She ordered the jump drive activated. Archimedes, you said the jump drive was destroyed. I said it was destroyed after one use, Admiral. I didn't say we couldn't use it one more time. What are the odds of survival? Negligible. But if we don't use it, the odds are 0 anyway. Kovac smiled grimly. Then let's make it count. I want a wormhole open directly inside the largest dimensional breach. And I want it to stay open. The AI was silent for a moment. Admiral, that would create a cascade effect. The wormhole's gravity would destabilize the breach, possibly collapsing it. But it would also destroy the jump drive, the engines, and likely tear the ship apart. But it would buy time. Yes, approximately 4 hours. Then we only need to survive 2 more hours the old-fashioned way. Kovac opened a ship-wide channel. All hands, this is the Admiral. We're about to do something remarkably stupid. Anyone who wants to evacuate to the escape pods, you have 60 seconds. No one will think less of you, she waited. 60 seconds passed. No one evacuated. I'm proud to serve with you, she said quietly. Now let's show the recursion why humanity doesn't quit. Activate the jump drive. The indomitable will's experimental wormhole generator spun up one final time. It created a tunnel through space, but instead of moving the ship, it held the tunnel open, forcing it to exist inside the dimensional breach. The effect was catastrophic. The wormhole's artificial gravity well collapsed the breach's structure, creating a feedback loop that propagated through the recursion's network. Breaches across the system began destabilizing. Entities found themselves cut off from their home dimension, dissolving as reality reasserted itself around them. But the ship was dying. Hull plates tore away as gravitational forces ripped at the supercarrier. Atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. The power cores screamed with the strain of maintaining the wormhole. 4 hours, Archimedes reported calmly. Then catastrophic structural failure. Dr. Sarai was aboard, had insisted on staying despite Kovach's protests. She watched from a secondary station as Earth's transport ships began lifting off, carrying refugees from a world that had hidden from the galaxy for 4 centuries. Billions would die. 500 million would live. It was the best humanity could do. 2 hours, Archimedes said. Reality-anchored deployment beginning. The device was enormous, a construct of exotic matter and impossibly precise mathematics. It lowered toward Earth's North Pole on gravity tethers, protected by the few remaining ships. When it activated, space itself seemed to sigh with relief. The anchor created a bubble of stable reality, forcing the recursion away like oil repelling water. The dimensional breaches couldn't exist within its field. They collapsed one by one as the anchor's influence spread, but it was slow. So terribly slow. 1 hour to full activation, Sato reported. His ship was badly damaged, barely holding together. Admiral, you need to evacuate. The indomitable will can't survive much longer. I'm aware, Commodore. Archimedes, crew status? 4,307 still alive. Escape pods launching. But Admiral, if you leave the bridge, the wormhole will collapse prematurely. Someone needs to maintain it manually. Kovach had known this was coming. Had known from the moment she ordered the jump drive activated. She looked at Reyes, at Park, at the crew who had trusted her. Get to the pods. That's an order. Admiral, now Commander. These people need a leader when this is over. That's you. I'm staying. They argued. She expected them to. But in the end they went. All except one. Dr. Sarai stood at the door to the bridge, her hand on the controls. Someone needs to keep the anchor stable after activation. Someone who understands human and alien technology. I'm staying too. Doctor, my entire life has been studying dead humans, Admiral. Let me help save some live ones. Sarai smiled sadly. Besides, someone should witness this. Someone should remember. There was no time to argue. The last escape pods launched. The indomitable will was almost alone now. Just the dying supercarrier and a handful of ships too damaged to run. 30 minutes, Archimedes said. Admiral, it has been an honor. The reality anchor reached full power. Its field expanded across the system, pushing the recursion back through collapsing breaches. Earth's barrier flickered, failed, but the anchor held. Reality stabilized. The recursion tried one final push, throwing everything it had against the anchor's field. For a moment it seemed like it would break through. Then the indomitable will's wormhole pulsed, creating a gravitational wave that shattered the last major breach. Silence fell, not complete. The recursion still existed in its home dimension, still pressed against reality's walls. But it was sealed out, contained, defeated. We did it, Sarai whispered. We actually did it. The indomitable will began to break apart. Kovach felt the deck shudder beneath her feet. Alarms screamed warnings about structural failures across every section. Archimedes, can you get us to an escape pod? I'm afraid not, Admiral, but I can do something else. The AI's presence seemed to expand through the ship's systems. It gathered every bit of power remaining, every gram of fuel in the emergency reserves. I can get you to Earth. It won't be graceful, and the ship won't survive it, but you will. Do it. The indomitable will fell toward Earth like a dying star. It burned as it entered the atmosphere, shedding pieces like tears. But Archimedes guided it, controlled it, turned a catastrophic crash into something almost gentle. The supercarrier came down in the Pacific Ocean, what was left of it. Most of the ship had burned away during re-entry. But the command section, reinforced and protected by the last of its shields, hit the water and floated. Rescue ships found them 6 hours later. Admiral Kovac and Dr. Sarai, the last crew of the Indomitable Will alive against all odds, Earth survivors greeted them as heroes. The Galactic Union declared humanity restored as a major power. The Indomitable Will's sacrifice became legend, a story told across 100 worlds. But Kovac stood on Earth's surface for the first time in 6 centuries and felt only emptiness. Her ship was gone. Her crew was scattered. And Earth, the Earth she remembered, was gone too. This world was different, scarred by 400 years of dimensional war. Sato found her standing at the ocean's edge, watching the sunset. "We're naming the new capital city after you, and there's talk of building a memorial at the crash site. The Indomitable Will saved everyone. It was always going to end this way," Kovac said quietly. "From the moment we were buried on Keth 7, we were always going to be the last defense, the failsafe that woke up when everything else failed. And now I'm an admiral without a ship in a world I don't recognize, among people I saved but don't know." She smiled slightly. "I suppose I'll have to learn to live with that." Years later, children played in the ruins of the Indomitable Will, where it rested in the Pacific shallows. The Galactic Union had declared it a protected site, a monument to the battle that saved reality itself. Dr. Sarai, now elderly, visited regularly. She told the story to anyone who would listen. The story of the ship that was buried in darkness returned in light and burned brightest when the universe needed it most. Humanity had proven something that day. Not that they were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. They'd proven that when faced with the choice between saving themselves and saving others, they'd choose others every time. They'd proven that being human meant standing between civilization and annihilation, even when no one would remember. Especially when no one would remember. The Indomitable Will was gone, but its legacy remained, written in the stars and in the hearts of every species that had survived because one old ship and its crew had refused to. Crit Admiral Helena Kovac stood at the monument and read the inscription that had been placed. "There, to the crew of the Indomitable Will. You were buried to survive. You woke to defend. You died to save us all. The galaxy will not forget." She placed her hand on the metal, felt the cold permanence of it. "We didn't die," she whispered. "We just became something else." She turned away from the monument and looked toward the horizon, where new cities were rising from the ashes of the old. Earth was rebuilding, slowly but surely. The 500 million refugees from the dimensional pocket were integrating with the scattered humans who had survived in the wider galaxy. 2 populations reuniting after 4 centuries of separation. It wasn't easy. The dimensional refugees carried scars, both physical and mental, from 400 years of war. They spoke differently, thought differently, remembered an Earth that no longer existed, and the scattered humans, people like Sarai, had built lives in a galaxy that had forgotten them. They'd learned to be small, to be quiet, to survive in the margins. Now both groups had to learn to be something new. Not the old empire that had conquered the stars, not the forgotten remnants that had hidden in the shadows, something better. Kovac had been offered a dozen positions: Fleet Admiral of the reformed United Earth Space Command, Ambassador to the Galactic Union, Governor of the new Mars colony that was being established in orbit as a replacement for the one lost in the dimensional war. She'd turned them all down. Instead, she'd taken a position that most people thought was beneath someone of her rank. She became an instructor at the new Terran Naval Academy, teaching young officers the lessons she'd learned across 6 centuries of service. Her students were a mix of dimensional refugees and scattered humans, with a surprising number of aliens mixed in. Frel and Luminar and even a few Kryn, all wanting to learn from the woman who had fought the recursion and lived. She taught them tactics and strategy, but more importantly, she taught them why they fought. "You don't fight to conquer," she would tell them, standing before a classroom of earnest young faces. "You fight to protect. You fight so others don't have to. And when the choice comes between your survival and the survival of those you're protecting, you choose them, every time. That's what it means to serve." Commander Reyes had taken a position in the new Earth Defense Fleet, commanding one of the vessels that maintained the watch around the reality anchor. The anchor still stood at Earth's North Pole, a permanent fixture now, ensuring that the recursion could never break through again. It needed constant monitoring, constant maintenance. It would need it for millennia. Lieutenant Park had retired from military service entirely. She'd opened a small restaurant in New Seoul, one of the dimensional cities that had been carefully transplanted to Earth's surface. She served food from recipes that had been preserved for 400 years, tastes that old Earth remembered. Kovac ate there sometimes, savoring flavors she'd thought she'd never experience again. Dr. Sarai Ohm had become something of a celebrity. She'd written a book about the indomitable will, about the battle, about what it meant for humanity's future. It had become required reading across the Galactic Union. She spent her time now traveling between worlds, teaching about human history to species that had only known humans as myths or refugees. But once a year, on the anniversary of the battle, they all came back to Earth. All the survivors, all the crew who had made it off the indomitable will before it crashed, all the pilots who had flown in that desperate defense, all the Galactic Union commanders who had chosen to fight alongside humanity instead of running. They gathered at the monument and remembered. This year was the 10th anniversary. The monument had grown over the decade, expanded to include the names of every ship lost in the battle, every person who had died holding the line. Human and alien names together, carved in black stone that seemed to absorb light. Kovac stood among the crowd, no longer wearing her uniform but dressed in simple civilian clothes. She was older now, the years finally catching up to a body that had been frozen in time for so long. Gray had conquered her hair completely. Lines marked her face like a map of battles fought and survived. But her eyes were still sharp, still searching, still the eyes of someone who had seen the universe try to end and had refused to let it. Sato found her in the crowd. The Commodore had aged too, though he'd been old when they met. He walked with a cane now, his body finally giving in to the radiation exposure from decades of fighting inside the dimensional pocket. "They're saying this is the last anniversary you'll attend," Sato said quietly. Kovac raised an eyebrow. "Who's saying that?" "The doctors. They're worried about your heart. Say you should be taking it easy, not making long trips to memorial sites. The doctors can worry all they want. I'll be here every year until they bury me." She paused, which admittedly might not be that many more years. But still, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the ceremony unfold. A Vrel admiral gave a speech about cooperation between species. A Luminar poet recited verses about sacrifice and hope. A hologram showed footage from the battle, carefully edited to remove the parts that would give children nightmares. Then it was Sarai's turn to speak. She walked to the podium slowly, her own age showing in the deliberate care of each step. When she spoke, her voice was still strong. "We gather here to remember the day the galaxy came together. Not because we wanted to, not because we liked each other, but because we had to, because the alternative was extinction." She looked out at the crowd, at the thousands of faces representing dozens of species. "The indomitable will taught us something important. It taught us that the divisions we create between ourselves, the old hatreds and grudges, they don't matter when faced with something bigger than all of us." She gestured to the monument behind her. "These names represent humans and Vrel and Luminar and Kryn and a dozen other species, all united in one purpose: survival. Not just their own, but everyone's. That's the legacy we need to remember. That's the lesson we need to carry forward." The crowd applauded. Kovac watched Sarai step down from the podium and felt a fierce pride. The young archaeologist who had discovered her ship had become one of the most important voices in the galaxy. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, a young human woman approached Kovac. She couldn't have been more than 20, with the kind of nervous energy that marked junior officers everywhere. "Admiral Kovac, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm graduating from the academy next month. I've been assigned to the UESC Defiant. We're one of the new supercarriers modeled after the indomitable will's design." Kovac studied the young woman. She had the same look that Kovac herself must have had centuries ago, eager and terrified and determined all at once. "Congratulations, Ensign. The Defiant is a good ship. I consulted on her design." "I know, ma'am. That's why I wanted to talk to you." The ensign took a deep breath. "They say you're the best officer humanity ever produced. That you fought impossible odds and won. That you sacrificed everything to save everyone." She paused. "How did you do it? How did you know it would be worth it?" Kovac was quiet for a long moment. She looked past the ensign, out at the ocean where her ship rested in eternal vigil. The water was calm today, peaceful, giving no sign of the violence that had occurred here a decade ago. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I didn't know if it would work. Didn't know if we'd survive. Didn't even know if what we were trying to save was worth saving." She met the young woman's eyes. "But I knew that if I didn't try, I'd never forgive myself. And I knew that my crew deserved a commander who would fight for them as hard as they fought for everyone else. And now, was it worth it?" Kovac looked around at the memorial, at the people gathered there. Humans and aliens, old and young, all of them alive because of choices made in desperation and executed in defiance of every reasonable expectation. "Yes," she said simply. "It was worth it." The ensign saluted, crisp and perfect. Kovac returned it, feeling the weight of centuries in that simple gesture. The young woman walked away, back straight, ready to carry the torch forward. Sato came to stand beside Kovac again. "She reminds me of you. She reminds me of all of us. Young and stupid and brave." Kovac smiled slightly. "The galaxy needs more of that. Less cynicism, more foolish hope." "Speaking of foolish hope, I have something to tell you." Sato's expression turned serious. "The reality anchor isn't as permanent as we thought." Kovac's stomach dropped. "Explain." "The dimensional engineers have been running long-term projections. The anchor will hold for our lifetimes, probably for several generations, but eventually, in maybe 200 or 300 years, it will degrade, and when it does, the recursion will try again. So we bought time, not a permanent solution. We bought humanity a chance to prepare, a chance to develop better technology, to build stronger defenses, to maybe find a way to destroy the recursion permanently instead of just holding it back." Sato looked at the monument. "The indomitable will gave us that chance. That's more than we had before." Kovac nodded slowly. "Then we'd better not waste it. The next generation will need to be ready. And the one after that. This becomes humanity's mission now. Not conquest, not expansion. Defense. Eternal vigilant defense against the dark. That's a heavy burden to pass on. Better than the alternative." Kovac turned away from the ocean, from her ship's grave, from the past that she could never return to. Besides, humans are good at carrying heavy burdens. It's what we do. As the sun set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the monument, Kovac allowed herself one final look back. The indomitable will was gone, but its spirit lived on. In the new ships being built, in the young officers being trained, in the alliance between species that had once been enemies. She had been buried for centuries and returned when the galaxy needed her most. Now it was time for others to take up that watch, to stand ready for the next crisis, the next impossible challenge. And when that day came, they would face it the same way the indomitable will had faced the recursion, with courage, with sacrifice, and with the absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for. Even if you didn't survive the fight, especially if you didn't survive the fight, because that's what it meant to be human, not to be the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but to be the ones who stood when others ran, who fought when others surrendered, who sacrificed so others could live. Admiral Helena Kovac walked away from the monument, into a future she would help build but might not live to see completed. Behind her, carved in stone, her ship's name caught the last rays of sunlight. U.S. Indomitable Will, buried in darkness, returned in light, forever watching. And that, she thought, was exactly how it should be.